Welcome to Shadow of Truth, NCIS versus The Vanishing Lieutenant, Fort Bragg's 2008 mystery. True crime documentary, NCIS, Fort Bragg, Fayetteville, missing person, Marine case. If you care about real investigations, not rumors, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. New true crime deep dives every week, told with respect for the victims and facts first. Smoke in the apartment, silence on the phone. The first calls started as whispers. Have you heard from Holly? Then came the texts, the voicemail checks, the quick drive-bys past her complex, just to see if her car moved an inch. By sunset, whispers had turned into a chorus of dread. A young Army lieutenant, 24 years old, a nurse who dreamed of pediatric floors and steady lives, had fallen silent in a place where silence meant trouble. Fort Bragg, Fayetteville, North Carolina. On the surface, it was a military town in high summer. Humid air, roaring engines, duty shifts that blurred the days. Beneath the surface, it was a bruised season already. One soldier had been found dead in a hotel room months earlier, and unsettling letters were trickling into newsrooms from a supposed copycat inspired by an infamous killer of decades past. Locals checked locks twice. Commanders checked rosters twice. When a service member skipped roll call, it wasn't "maybe she's late." It was "find her now." Holly's friends were the first to feel it in their bones. She always called back. It might be during her lunch break at Womack Army Medical Center, or after a 12-hour shift, still in scrubs, laughing that she needed coffee and sleep at the same time. But she called back. When she didn't, people who knew her best stopped making assumptions and started making moves. One close friend, a co-worker from the maternity ward who'd seen Holly's warmth with families on the hardest nights, drove to the apartment. She pressed her face to the glass. Something was off even before she lifted a finger to knock. A smell hung in the air, chemical, charred. The lights inside looked wrong, like a room exhaling after the flame instead of before it. Through the window, she saw darkened patches on the walls, soot freckles where there shouldn't be any. Instinct kicked in. 911. By the time investigators stepped inside, the contradictions piled up like clues. Holly's car was still outside, but inside, a portion of carpet in a bedroom was missing, cut out in a clean geometry that told a story no one wanted to hear. In the kitchen, a tidy block of knives was missing a couple of slots, as if someone had plucked them with purpose. 2 bedrooms showed signs of fire. Windows were broken. The scent of accelerant lingered even with the front door open. It was deliberate. It was hurried. It was designed to erase. Where was Holly? The perimeter filled with uniforms and plain clothes. Neighbors talked in low voices, then louder ones, recalling what they'd seen the night before. A figure in dark clothing, moving fast. A black pickup truck. The kind of hurried exit people sense without seeing every detail. The timeline began to take shape. The questions multiplied faster than the answers. NCIS stepped in quickly. When a case touches active duty households, Army, Marines, Navy, the web of jurisdiction draws in seasoned agents who know the difference between rumor and proof. One of them, a retired Marine gunnery sergeant turned special agent, had a reputation for the unglamorous parts of the job. Knocking on doors, comparing versions, finding the thing that doesn't fit, and tugging until the whole knot loosens. He began with the obvious place, the person closest to Holly. Her husband, a Marine corporal stationed at Camp Lejeune, split time between the base and Holly's apartment. Their marriage, friends said, had started like a spark, fast, bright, full of promise, but recently felt like a storm with no break in the forecast. The agent met him, asked basic questions, then a few more. Where were you that night? When did you last see her? Have you noticed anything missing? It was procedural, but not perfunctory. In cases like this, the last person to see her alive isn't a poetic phrase. It's a critical anchor point. The conversation didn't last long. Something about it didn't sit right. The agent stepped back, cataloged the tone, the reactions, the details offered, and the ones conspicuously avoided. He filed it all away because that's what pros do. But he also widened the circle. Friends, co-workers, neighbors, relatives, building a portrait of Holly as a person, not just a name in a case file. The portrait that emerged was consistent. Holly was kind, steady, razor sharp on the ward, and tender with new parents at 3 a.m. She'd been a devoted mom before she put on a uniform, and the uniform, friends said, didn't change that. It only expanded her radius of care, but there was a shadow in the portrait, stories of a relationship grown volatile, of arguments that rattled the walls, of phone calls that left her drained. A friend quietly mentioned a protective order that had been started but never finalized. Another remembered seeing bruises Holly didn't want to talk about. No one wanted to leap to conclusions, and yet the conclusions kept stepping forward on their own. Back at the apartment, forensics teams worked slowly and respectfully. Fires speak, even when they're set to silence a scene, where accelerant pools, where flames lick upward, where heat patterns bloom in corners, these map intent. The missing carpet suggested the removal of potential evidence. The broken windows told of smoke and panic or staging, or both. The knife block's empty slots felt less like a household detail and more like a timestamp. Something happened here, and someone knew exactly what they were taking. Meanwhile, the town's nerves were frayed by other storms. A previous homicide had stretched community trust thin. The copycat letter writer had made headlines and nightmares. The press circled the complex, lenses long and patience short. Commanders gave briefings with careful words. Holly wasn't just missing. She was a lieutenant, a nurse, a mother, a daughter. The human toll was more than a headline. It was multiplying. Friends who hadn't slept, a father pacing phone to phone, children too young to understand why grown-ups kept whispering. Tips trickled in. A black pickup seen idling near the complex, a man in dark clothes moving fast between buildings, a neighbor who thought they heard something that sounded like furniture dragging. Or maybe it was nothing. It's hard to be sure when the mind replays fear. The agent and his team followed each thread. Camera sweeps, access logs, base gate records, fuel receipts, phone pings. Most threads frayed, one held. It started as a small, almost incidental note from Camp Lejeune. A young Marine had been asking around to borrow a pickup truck on the evening in question. Not you a Marine, me a Marine, can you help? A favor in a culture where favors are currency. The ask was ordinary, the timing wasn't. NCIS found him quickly. He said it was nothing. Then he said he couldn't remember. Then he said he met his wife. His wife did not agree. Inconsistencies aren't guilt, but they are gravity. They pull you back to certain people and places because they're where the truth is hiding. The interviews stretched hours into days. Gently at first, then firmly, investigators pressed without breaking, giving the young Marine enough space to tell the truth and enough reminders that there was a truth to tell. Photos on the table, not graphic, not exploitative, just the real-life Holly smiling with her kids, in uniform with friends. A person whose absence was reshaping a family tree changed the room's temperature. He glanced down, then away. When he looked up, the story began to shift. He admitted he'd driven over that night. He admitted carrying items out of the apartment. He insisted he didn't know where Holly was. He asked for water. The agents paused the camera, called for a short break, returned with the clock still ticking. This wasn't a courtroom. It was the crucible where stories either harden into lies or pour out as confessions. While that interview inched forward, a call came in from a different corner of North Carolina's map. A forestry firefighter had noticed something troubling off a rural road, a scorched patch of earth and a shallow disturbance in the soil that didn't look like a campfire gone wrong. Smoke does not always mean crime, and disturbed ground does not always mean tragedy, but investigators don't get to choose which signs they follow them all. They traveled to the site, pine and sand, open sky, the ghost of a fire drifting on the breeze. In the clearing, soil told a story that no one wanted to read. Local deputies secured the area, NCIS coordinated. Every step was measured, every photograph bracketed, every sample logged. This was the kind of scene that demands restraint and reverence, pain acknowledged, dignity maintained, evidence preserved. In the days that followed, the science would speak with certainty about identity and cause. In the moment, the weight of it pressed on everyone present. Back at the interview room, the air shifted again. The young Marine's knees stopped bouncing. He looked down at his hands and spoke more plainly. He admitted he'd helped move items from the apartment. He acknowledged the pickup. He still refused to some more, but the wall he'd built around himself was lower now. The agents could see over it. Investigations are built the way skilled nurses manage a fraught night on the ward. One patient, one chart, one critical value at a time. You don't announce a miracle, you pressure. Map the problem until the path forward reveals itself. That's what NCIS did in those first 48 hours, balancing compassion and resolve, honoring a victim while refusing to be distracted by the noise of a town bracing for the worst. As night fell again over Fayetteville, one truth had settled, like the dust in Holly's apartment. The fire was no accident. Someone tried to hide something and failed. A black pickup linked two scenes, a quiet complex and a rural clearing. And one person, by rank, by relationship, by proximity, was now more than a name in a report. He was the gravity point of a story that was bending toward an arrest. But how would agents close the distance from strong suspicion to proof? What exactly happened inside that apartment, before the flames, before the missing carpet, before the silence on Holly's phone? And would the young Marine at Camp Lejeune finally cross the line from half-truths to the whole truth? The next step would demand sharper questions, tighter timelines, and a move only seasoned investigators make when the facts and the clock leave no other option. The confession pressure cooker, trucks, timelines, and a break in the pines. The second day began with a list and a clock. The list held every lead that hadn't yet collapsed under scrutiny. The clock reminded agents that families don't sleep when someone they love is missing. In a conference room bordered by caseboards and coffee cups, NCIS mapped the puzzle. The burned apartment, the missing carpet, the quiet car still parked outside, the neighbor reports of a man in dark clothing, and the black pickup that kept slipping through the story like a shadow. The center of gravity remained the same, Holly's inner circle. Co-workers were re-interviewed. Friends repeated the details they wished weren't true. Strained calls, a protective order that started but never finished, a relationship that turned stormy. The questions were practical, not prying. What exact time was the last voicemail? Who had keys? When did the routine break? Each answer tightened the timeline by minutes, and minutes matter in cases like this. Down the hall, an interview room sat under steady fluorescent light. A young Marine, Kyle, shifted in his chair, palms flat on the table, as if bracing for a wave he couldn't stop. He had already admitted the simple parts. Yes, he'd tried to borrow a truck. Yes, he drove toward Fayetteville that night. Yes, he helped carry items out of an apartment. He insisted he knew nothing about Holly's location. He wished the questions would end at that boundary. The investigators didn't raise their voices. They raised their standards for detail. "Walk us through it," a detective said, sliding a notepad between them. "Start with when the phone rings." Kyle glanced at the pad but kept his eyes on the table. The call came from another Marine, older, higher rank, persuasive in the way rank can be. The ask was framed as a favor. Help move some things, no big deal, quick in and out. Nothing about the request sounded like an emergency, but the timing was inconvenient enough that it should have raised a flag. It didn't. In military life, favors borrowed are favors repaid. As Kyle traced the hours, the agents traced the map. Base to highway, highway to apartment complex, past the row of buildings with identical facades. He described a complex that matched photographs and a door that opened to the smell of smoke that didn't belong. He carried bags and boxes, he said, ordinary words that had to be tested against reality. What color? What weight? From which room? To where? Methodical questions, not to trip him, but to keep the account from sliding into vagueness. Vague helps no one, not the truth, and certainly not Holly. He admitted the truck had returned to the road, heading east, then south, miles becoming hours. He said they stopped in a rural area where the night is deep and the traffic is thin. He keyed, Pete repeating that he didn't ask questions he didn't want answered. The room stayed quiet long enough for him to hear himself say it. Then the agents gently returned to the beginning. "Tell us again when the phone rang." This is the slow engine of investigative work. Repetition that reveals contradiction, detail that catches on a rough edge, a timeline that refuses to hold when pushed from 3 different angles. Somewhere between the first telling and the 5th, a story either strengthens or splits. Kyle's began to split. In the middle of the interview sequence, a separate team was already on a 2-lane road framed by pines, responding to a call that sounded like a rumor until they stood on the sand and felt the heat that lingered there. A forestry firefighter had spotted a disturbed patch of ground and the remnants of a recent burn. It didn't look like recreational carelessness. The clearing was quiet, and the air held that post-fire tang that settles in your clothes. Deputies and agents worked in careful patterns, square by square, photograph by photograph. No one spoke louder than necessary. Scenes like this demand dignity first. The discovery didn't end the investigation. It redirected it. Back at the interview room, the tone changed. The agents didn't gloat. They didn't need to. They simply re-anchored the interview to facts that were no longer theoretical. There was a rural clearing. There was evidence that connected two locations that should never have been connected. When they asked the next round of questions, they were no longer asking if Kyle had returned to the coast. They were asking how. Something in him deflated. Not a collapse, but the posture of someone who understands that the only way through is forward. He admitted more plainly that he'd helped transport items out of the apartment. He admitted he'd driven with another Marine who was agitated and insistent. He said he helped dig, though he avoided exact descriptions as if the words themselves might indict him. The investigators didn't ask for graphic detail. They asked for the practical scaffolding of the truth. Who brought what? Who placed what? Where did the tools come from? Who decided to go there? Why that location? What happened to the truck after? On a separate track, lab teams pushed the apartment evidence as fast as chain of custody allows. The accelerant traces were consistent with intentional ignition. The broken windows read like hurried release points rather than accidental blows. The cutout carpet piece, surgically absent, was the kind of subtraction that speaks louder than a stain. The knife block with its empty mouths became more than a household object. It was a checklist with 2 boxes unchecked. When the rural scene yielded tools, agents carefully documented each one without speculation. Later, when shapes and measurements could be compared against standard sets, those comparisons would either hold or fail. Good investigations are built to survive both outcomes. Here, the shapes would matter. Meanwhile, the person at the center of all this, the husband, the Marine corporal, remained under watch. He declined further conversation without counsel, which is a right, not a confession. Agents didn't confuse process with proof. They tracked movements, corroborated whereabouts, examined fuel and phone records. They spoke again with the people who lived near Holly's building. One resident remembered the sound of tired brakes late at night. Another remembered a dark truck angling into a spot it didn't usually take. Memory is a fragile instrument. The job is to tune it with independent data. Cameras, receipts, pings, a gate guard's scribbled time, each small and incomplete on its own, began to sing the same line when put together. As the third day wore on, Kyle grew quieter, then clearer. He said the call that started everything occurred on a weeknight, not a weekend. Important in a military town where rhythm matters. He admitted he felt pressure, rank, loyalty, fear, the whole toxic stew that makes people choose terribly, when a firm no would have been the only right answer. He insisted he never saw Holly that night. He admitted hearing words he didn't want to hear while standing near a doorway in a smoky room. He admitted helping carry weight he decided not to name. He said the drive felt 3 times as long as it was because the silence in the cab was heavy enough to tip the truck. The agents didn't turn the interview into a stage. They kept it focused. Names, times, distances, objects, actions. When they reached the part of the night that moved from Fayetteville to the coastal county, he paused a long time. The lead investigator slid a photograph across the table. Nothing graphic, just a wide shot of the clearing before the tight frames began. "We were there," he said. "Talk to us like we were." That was the break, not theatrics, just a patient demand for the full story. Kyle confirmed the location. He acknowledged helping to prepare the ground. He confirmed a sequence: arrival, unloading, placing, attempting to burn, leaving, that matched the road times and the fuel stops now plotted on a board 2 rooms away. He still tried to minimize his role, but minimization with specifics is different from evasive generalities. Specifics can be tested. In this case, they were already halfway tested. In parallel, the community braced itself. News moved faster than formal announcements. People saw marked cars on rural lanes and understood what that likely meant. Friends who had been living on caffeine and hope began calling each other with voices that shook. A father answered the phone and heard the preface no parent wants to hear. "Before you see it on the news," the pause after that sentence is longer than any clock can measure. Back a beat. T headquarters, NCIS, and local detectives did the hard administrative work that viewers rarely see: drafting warrants, aligning jurisdictions, documenting interviews down to the minute, preparing affidavits that connected facts without overreaching. They knew where this was going if the pieces held, and they were holding. An arrest executed too early risks collapse. Too late risks flight or tampering. The timing had to be exact. The team also faced a moral accounting that professionals quietly shoulder. How to talk about a victim in a way that honors her life, not just her last days. In briefings, the lead investigator repeated Holly's name with her rank and her role as a nurse, as a mother and a daughter. He instructed his team to avoid casual phrasing. This wasn't theater, it was stewardship of a story that belonged first to a family. As evening fell, Kyle had one more truth to offer. He confirmed that the ask for help came from the husband. He described the husband's mood, agitated, determined, not panicked, as if a decision had already been made and the rest was logistics. He said the pickup was borrowed and returned in the small hours before the sun. He gave enough details about the interior, an air freshener, a cracked dash trim, that, when investigators checked, matched the vehicle they had already traced. It was enough. Warrants were sworn. On base, a quiet plan was set in motion. No spectacle, just a precise moment when a suspect would be informed that the investigation had moved from questions to custody. The lead agent expected a reaction: anger, denial, collapse. What he saw instead, when the cuffs clicked and the words were read, was something more unsettling. A calm face, an unbothered stare, a posture that suggested resignation without remorse. From the first unanswered voicemail to that steady, unblinking look, only days had passed. For the people who loved Holly, each hour had felt like a year. For the investigators, the work was only shifting phases, from searching to proving, from interviews to courtrooms, from silent timelines to spoken charges. But cases are not resolved merely by arrests. They are resolved by truth that can stand under oath. The community still needed answers to the hardest questions. What happened inside the apartment before the flames? How did the apartment and the clearing become connected? And why, of all the ways a difficult relationship can break, did this one end in a permanent silence? From evidence to justice, lab links, the plea, and Holly's legacy. By the time the arrest report was signed, Fort Bragg was bracing for headlines. For a community still haunted by unsolved murders and the shadow of a copycat killer, the confirmation that Lieutenant Holly Lynn James Y. Monk had been found and that her husband, Marine Corporal John Y. Monk, was in custody didn't bring peace. It brought shock, grief, and a demand for truth. The evidence connects. Investigators returned to both crime scenes, Holly's apartment and the clearing outside Camp Lejeune, with one mission: connect the spaces through science. The missing knives from Holly's kitchen were compared with blades found near the shallow grave. They matched perfectly. Same brand, same handle wear, same set. Burn patterns from both locations contained identical accelerant residues, a blend of gasoline and a household solvent found in Monk's garage. Microscopic carpet fibers recovered from the truck matched the exact weave of the carpet cut from Holly's bedroom. The missing piece taken from her apartment had been used to wrap what was later found in the clearing. Even the tape residue from the edges of that carpet told the same story, a hurried cleanup by someone familiar with the apartment layout. Holly's car remained untouched outside her apartment, a silent witness to what happened inside. Her keys, found in a dresser drawer, and her pieds sources. One, never used again after that July night, became the clock hands marking her final moments. Each piece of physical evidence was like a sentence, and together they formed a statement so clear it needed no embellishment. There had been a fire to destroy proof, a removal of evidence, and a burial meant to erase. None of it worked. The breakthrough and the confession. While lab results were being finalized, NCIS focused on Kyle Alden, the young Marine whose loyalty had become his undoing. He had already cracked under pressure in the interrogation room, admitting he helped move things, but claiming he didn't know the full horror. That changed when investigators confronted him with what they had found. "We know where she is, Kyle," an agent said quietly. "We've been there." Silence filled the room. Then Kyle spoke, not with defiance, but with exhaustion. He told them that John had called late on July 9th, frantic and unstable, saying, "I did something bad." He asked for help. When Kyle arrived, Holly was already gone. John said they had argued, that it got out of control. Kyle admitted he helped carry what he believed was a large bag. He described the fire, the drive, the digging, and the final act that haunted him every time he closed his eyes. He didn't try to justify it anymore. When investigators pressed him to say Holly's name, his voice broke. "Her name was Holly Lynn James," he said, "and I'm sorry." For the agents who had worked nonstop for nearly a week, it wasn't victory. It was confirmation of what their instincts had already screamed. Love had turned to control. Control had turned to violence. And violence had turned into an attempted cover-up that failed under the weight of evidence. The arrest and trial on July 14, 2008, NCIS, working with the Fayetteville Police Department, moved in quietly at Camp Lejeune. Inside a military office, John Y. Monk stood still as he was told he was under arrest for the murder of his wife, Lieutenant Holly Lynn James Y. Monk. Agents expected resistance, maybe denial. Instead, he remained calm, coldly calm, they later said. No questions, no outburst, no visible grief. In the days that followed, the full story came together. John and Holly's marriage had fractured under jealousy and control. She had filed a restraining order just weeks before her death, but hadn't pursued it to permanence. Her friends remembered her saying, "He's angry, but he won't hurt me." In court filings, prosecutors described the scene as meticulously staged to simulate an accidental fire, but the science stripped that illusion away. Autopsy results confirmed a single gunshot wound as the cause of death. The district attorney, Billy West, announced his office would seek the death penalty, citing premeditation, cruelty, and betrayal of trust. But the case never reached a full jury trial. After 2 years of motions, evidence reviews, and psychological evaluations, John Y. Monk accepted a plea deal. Guilty to first-degree murder, guilty to second-degree arson, guilty to conspiracy to commit arson. In exchange, he received life in prison without parole. Kyle Alden, who cooperated fully and testified about the events of that night, was sentenced to 5 years for second-degree arson and accessory after the fact. He served 3 before being released. Both men were dishonorably discharged from the Marine Corps, the aftermath. When the sentencing concluded, there were no cheers in the courtroom, just tears and quiet disbelief. Holly's parents sat holding a folded flag that once draped her coffin. Her father, Jesse James, a university dean, spoke softly to reporters afterward. "You think the word divorce means anger, separation, maybe pain. But it doesn't mean death. That's not supposed to be part of the story." In the months that followed, Jesse traveled across North Carolina speaking at domestic violence awareness events, especially within military communities. He became a voice for change, telling service members, commanders, and families that the warning signs must never be ignored, no matter how uncomfortable it feels to intervene. "My daughter served her country," he said, "but her country needs to do better serving those who suffer in silence." Her friends from the maternity ward at Womack Army Medical Center started a small scholarship fund in her name for nursing students, especially those from military families. They said Holly's compassion lived on in every new nurse who held a newborn and remembered what it meant to care deeply, even on the hardest nights. The legacy, years later, investigators who worked the case still describe it as one they will never forget. Not because of the violence, but because of the person at its center, a woman who dedicated her life to healing others, only to be failed by the one who vowed to protect her. Agent J.C. Hawks later said in a documentary interview, "She was a daughter, a mother, a nurse, and an officer. She deserved more than the way her story ended." Cases like this remind us why we keep going, because truth is the only justice we can offer the dead. In Fort Bragg, the summer of 2008 remains a scarred chapter. But in classrooms, hospitals, and memorial runs, Holly's name continues to appear, not as a victim, but as a symbol of awareness, strength, and compassion. Her 2 children, now grown, still visit her hometown in Iowa every year. Locals say they walk past a bronze plaque near the small-town library that reads, "In honor of Lieutenant Holly Lynn James Y. Monk, a mother, a healer, and a light that still guides others home." If this story moved you, don't scroll away. Hit like, subscribe, and comment. Justice for Holly to help keep her memory alive. Every view, every share, every comment helps the real stories of victims reach more people who might still be living through silent danger.